Welcome to the Exoduscry podcast, where we have honest conversations around exploitation, trafficking, sexual culture, and justice.
Well, hello. We are on the Exoduscry podcast. I have a really special guest with us this week that I've been looking forward to for a long time now. Sitting down with me here in the studio is Representative Laurie Schlegel from Louisiana. Thank you so much for being here with us, Laurie, and for flying in, especially for this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, and for people who don't know who you are, just by way of introduction, Representative Schlegel is the individual who first introduced the first bill of age verification passing in Louisiana, which is about a year and a half ago now, that it went into law, the first state of many, which we'll get into that whole story. But before we kick off with that, I just really wanted to hear more from you about how you got into politics, a little bit about your origin story. Are you from Louisiana? What even drew you into getting involved in politics?
Sure. So I am from Louisiana. Actually didn't think this would be my path to get into politics. I mean, it was always sort of civically involved into our community and whatnot. And I'm a licensed professional counselor, so that's what I do by trade. Mm-hmm. And it was in 2021 where my predecessor kind of unexpectedly resigned. And that was in February. And I think I had about a week's time to actually make a decision on running. It was going to be a very short turnaround in terms of the election. Yeah. And so I thought about it. I had a very encouraging husband who was actually also involved in politics. And so I did it and I won. And so I started in middle of a session in May 2021.
Okay, so really you hadn't been in that position for very long before introducing this groundbreaking bill. For those people who've been tracking with Exoduscry for several years, it was really only in the last 4 years that we began specifically campaigning around the intersection of pornography and trafficking, and many people followed the Trafficking Hub campaign that we spearheaded, and then we turned our attention to a campaign about protecting children from porn and age verification. And I was told by someone in Washington, D.C. at the time who's quite involved in this movement that they thought the U.S. would be the last country to ever pass it, because they said there's so many regulations or lack of regulations that the porn industry is able to hide behind with free speech in the First Amendment. And they felt a little bit despairing that the U.S. would ever introduce any form of age verification. And so we were still campaigning hard, feeling really hopeful. And then I cannot tell you the excitement on our team when we heard the news that this amazing representative in Louisiana had been the one to break the ice and to write a bill around that. So I would love to hear from you how you even thought about this bill, what gave you the idea, and just the series of events that led you to introducing it.
Sure. So, I mean, just like I had no intention of going into politics or running for office, really out of the gate, I did not have any intention of doing a bill like this. So by trade, I said I'm a licensed professional counselor. I am also a CSAT. I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. So I work in a practice that does help people who have compulsive sexual behavior and have this issue with pornography. So I'm very familiar with, obviously the topic. And so, but again, I wasn't about to mingle that with me being in elected office at the time. But so it was around December, and I remember I read an article around Billie Eilish had a interview with Howard Stern, and in it she mentioned how she had been watching porn since she was 11 and it destroyed her brain and just the impact that it had on her life. And I just kind of remembering at the time how courageous that was, for a person of her stature, and also a woman just having that conversation with Howard Stern. It just struck me because I'm like, wow, I mean, obviously I see it every day in my practice, but for somebody to kind of put it out there in the world, and I'm like, you know what, I need to look about maybe doing something. And a lot of things intersected at the time that just sort of made this again, a perfect storm, although I think a storm, it was a good thing. And so what I did, it was December. And I said, in order to make this work, there was a few things I knew I had to make sure. So privacy. No matter what the porn industry says, we care more about privacy than they do, right? So I wanted to make sure if I were to tackle something like age verification, could we keep people's identifying information private. And so at the time we were coming out of the pandemic, and in the state of Louisiana, in order to keep our court system open, they were doing virtual court. And we have a thing called LA Wallet, which is our digital ID, which came a few years even before I got into the legislature. And so my husband is a judge in Jefferson Parish, and they were utilizing this technology. And so I had asked him, I said, hey, and so in order to come onto like a virtual court, they had to make sure, okay, hey, this is Laurie Schlegel. You have to make sure you identify who the defendant is. And so I said, do you think they could do like where you could verify somebody's age, but without giving any kind of identifying information? He's like, well, you should talk to LA Wallet, because that's what they were using in the court system. So I contacted LA Wallet and I said, hey, is the technology available that you would be able to identify someone's age, but without giving any kind of identifying information?
Because that's the key.
This is the key.
It's age verification, not identity verification.
Right. And it's not even an exact age verification, it's course age. So can you say, yes, this person is over 18, or no, this person is under 18? And they said, yes, the technology is available. Actually, we don't even store any information. We just pretty much say, yes, this person's over 18, let them in. I said, okay, could you testify under oath in a committee hearing saying this is true? And they said, yes, we'll even do a video for you to tell you how it's done. I said, perfect. So I knew that part of it, I could protect people's privacy. Also, I put in the bill that you couldn't actually retain anyone's private information, or you can then get sued. So I want to make sure all the safeguards were there. And then I also knew, so our legislature is Republican majority. We had a Democratic governor at the time. And so I wanted to make sure we were able to get bipartisan support. I didn't want it to be, oh, this is just a Republican bill by a Republican legislator. So in my work, I knew Gail Dines. And so I just sent out an email. It was the week of Christmas. And I just sent her a blind email saying, hey, what I was doing, and she contacted me, and she said, yeah, she'd be willing to help me.
We love Gail Dines.
I know she's amazing. And what was great about Gail is, like she puts it out there like, hey, I'm a, radical feminist. And so we're opposite politically, but yet very much about this topic and protecting children. And so I was vice chair of the Women's Caucus at the time. And so the Women's Caucus sponsored a webinar, and where we invited the whole legislature to come, and Dr. Dines was going to educate on just, how this affects children and just like actually what they're seeing. And so we did that. We had Democrats, Republicans, and our independent, male, female, African-American, white, like just a great representation of our legislature that was actually doing the webinar. And I remember after that, I even had people across the aisle being like, what can I do to help? I want to be a co-sponsor. And so I knew then I would have, no matter what came from me outside of the body, that the body was pretty united in passing this sort of legislation.
Incredible. And I love that, like, something that we as an organization really strongly believe in is the power of bipartisanship in this movement, and that certain issues related to child protection, human rights, trafficking, it doesn't matter where you fall on the political spectrum, and this isn't just within the US, everywhere in the world, this is a human rights issue. And being able to frame it to people, especially parents, especially people who care about protecting children or have any knowledge of what is their kids are really being exposed to on porn sites, this is something that they can sign on in support of. And I know that we have a really diverse following base, and something that I've been really encouraged with this legislation is seeing a lot of the bills had bipartisan co-authorship, co-sponsorship. And I think I was on a call where I heard you share about Dr. Gail Dines breaking down some of the education even of the racism on porn, the incest-themed pornography, the violence in porn. A lot of people still aren't aware of what modern-day tube pornography sites are displaying. By the time you heard Billie Eilish's story, because of your own career and background and practice, had you already worked directly with those struggling with porn addiction who'd been exposed as children? Like, had you already seen some of those firsthand harms?
I did. So a lot of our clients, especially more of the young adults, there were many of them that were exposed to early exposure to online pornography, and just how it affected them and how it put their life sort of on a different trajectory. So, I mean, again, this was very sort of common to me, but again, I think for the regular person, not so much. And so I think that's the key piece with Dr. Dines educating, because when you get educated on actually what our children are seeing and actually how easily they're seeing it, then I don't think you cannot not support something like this.
Right.
And I think that's sort of when people were educated. And I remember even getting some of emails from some of my colleagues saying, I didn't even realize. And again, just willing to support me in how we could get this done.
I feel like Billie Eilish sharing what she did was so brave and quite unexpected. Like I can't remember exactly how it even came up in the interview, but I listened to the full interview and she was very brutally honest with sharing. She used that phrase, it destroyed my brain, gave her night terrors, stole her childhood, and she was homeschooled as well. And so I think that was a key point that we heard from some parents of, oh, wow, like even homeschooling my child doesn't protect them from this. And so I think that's another point, that a parent could be doing the best they can. They could be not even giving a device to their child, but you can't, like, as long as these websites have open access to anyone, a child goes to a friend's house and they could be exposed. And so there has to be higher forms of barriers and protections. And as far as the bill itself, I know you've said that the civil side was something you were inspired by, seeing the traction with the Trafficking Hub campaign and all the survivors that were suing Pornhub and taking that kind of route of legal action. And that, I think that's really exciting to think of other new forms of accountability beyond only criminal penalty.
Yeah, so I was very familiar with the New York Times when I think it's Nicholas Kristof did, and then being just aware that there were people who were actually suing Pornhub. And so when I started to try to figure out the path I was going to take with the law, so another thing I had to also address is obviously the First Amendment. So we have free speech here, and pornography is considered free speech. So I just so happened to have a friend who is a First Amendment lawyer. And so before I started drafting the bill, we went and looked at the Supreme Court precedent in Ashcroft and Reno to see, okay, what was the basis of the ruling and what path could I take? And so it was interesting because when you read some of the rulings, I remember one justice said that the likelihood of a child to even see pornography was really slim. So if you got to think about it, so in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was no such thing as an iPhone or an iPad. And then a lot of the pornography was behind paywall. So at that time, it was probably true that, the likelihood was probably slim. But now we know 100%. It's so easy. I mean, the average age is now, I think, between 10 to 12 years old. And so now the government has a compelling interest to protect children. And I think it's even more now than ever. And so you have to battle sort of that liberty, personal liberties with the compelling interest to protect children. And so all the prior laws when it comes to age verification were criminal laws, which some can say that maybe losing your freedom would have more of a chilling effect on free speech. So I went the civil route and wanted to set up a regulation. And then if you did not follow our state's regulation, then you could be civilly sued.
Yeah. And now, since Louisiana introduced it, I believe the latest numbers are around 19 states have passed and 37, I believe, have introduced.
I think 19 total. I haven't been following all the ones that introduced, except I know California and I think Arizona got pretty far. So I mean, it's amazing if you think. So I passed the law in 2022. I did give the porn industry 6 months to sort of comply and be able to comply with the law. And then so it went in effect January 1st of 2023. So and that's sort of when I guess the world became aware of it, because it was January 1st and I guess somebody went to go look at pornography, and then the little page came up where Pornhub said, okay, in the state of Louisiana, laws passed, you'll have to do age verification. And so they sent out a tweet, and I think it's the tweet that was heard around the world, I guess, and that sort of was the catalyst of everyone finding out. And so from January 2023 to where we are now, I mean, let's say about over a year, 18 other states passed, which I say just shows you the magnitude of the problem, and that the fact that we really have abdicated our responsibility to protect our children online.
What was some of the response that you felt even in Louisiana once it was passed? Were you getting mostly positive feedback? Did you have any angry backlash from people?
So in terms of regular constituents, I didn't. I mean, you had the one or two that were, angry that like now this was another step, which was interesting. The next step when because I wanted to make sure it wasn't unduly burdensome for adults to access their freedom of speech, which that's very important when looking at the law. Pornhub, even on their landing page in Louisiana, it says it takes less than 1 minute. So it takes less than 1 minute for an adult to see the unlimited pornography that they want, and it takes less than 1 minute to protect a child. And so I don't think it's very unduly burdensome. So you did have a few people that, again, it's something that they've just, for decades have just, had absolutely no regulations.
Exactly.
But I received a lot of positive feedback, and what I received was a lot of state legislators contacted me. How can I do this in my state? So just being able to field some of those calls, and obviously some of the media. And I was very surprised. A lot of the mainstream media actually gave it a very fair portrayal, because I think people just realize this is really a big issue. And again, I'm not trying to prevent anything for adults. I have a passion around children and just in sort of protecting our next generation, because I feel like it's our responsibility, for me as a mother, to raise up the next generation to be fully functional. And then as a legislator, to put in guardrails for our children to make sure, especially because we're finding that they're in a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So where I got probably the most negative, I would say, portrayal is from the tech industry and some of the tech articles, which I find was really disingenuous, because, they talked about privacy, yet, Pornhub's a big data mining company. And so I just felt it was very disingenuous. I just feel like the tech industry is not quite yet been responsible, especially to children when it comes to the internet. Of course, every industry wants to be unregulated and be able to do whatever they want.
But the truth is that the tech exists to verify age and protect children. And how about using tech for good? Our founder, Benji, often says the internet is like a city without walls. And it shouldn't be the wild, wild west where children are being exposed to traumatizing, violent content and 2 clicks away from accessing that. And most porn sites didn't even have a click if you're I'm over 18 button. And a lot of people say, is that what you're meaning when you say age verification? We're like, no, not click if you're over 18, click your date of birth. It's putting in a government ID or a facial recognition or even a hand recognition. In other states that don't have LA Wallet like Louisiana, there's all types of other technology that now exists that can effectively verify age, not identity. But it really doesn't take very long. It's absolutely something that should be a priority around protecting children. And I'm kind of not surprised that the tech industry says that. I mean, we're in an environment right now where big tech is being held accountable. The Metas, the Mark Zuckerbergs of our day and age, and I feel like a universal recognition of actually some forms of tech, not just porn, but other forms are addictive, are causing harm to children, and we need to legislate to bring about better protections. By age 13, most kids have already been exposed to porn. This disturbing, very often violent content is not only traumatizing children, it's toxically rewiring their sexual templates. More than ever before, we must protect our kids from the life-altering consequences of underage exposure. That's why we launched the Protect Children Not Porn campaign, calling for laws that require porn sites to use ID-based age verification to ensure its site visitors are at least 18 years old. Since we launched the campaign, 10 states have already passed this law, and many more have introduced it, but we need to push for all 50. Sign our petition at exoduscry.com/PCNP so we can protect millions of children from porn. I was actually in Hollywood the week after your bill was first introduced in January 2023, and someone had sent me a seminar that the porn industry were hosting all about how we can legislate against these or how we can push back against these anti-trafficking organizations trying to legislate against our industry. And someone was like, they're probably going to be talking about you guys and the campaigns you're doing. So they gave me their wristband to attend undercover. And in that meeting, they talked a lot about your bill and the mood in the room of these are the top porn producers, top porn directors, anyone and everyone in Hollywood. And they were really angry. And the discussion was, how do we overturn this? How do we push back against this? And I was even shocked that there wasn't more acknowledgement of, well, of course, this is where the industry is going. We need better protections for children. We don't want kids exposed to this content. That rhetoric wasn't there. It was, these legislations are going to be bad for our business. They are going to be causing harm to our industry. Someone stood up and said, we need to fight dirty like this. They fight dirty, these $1 million anti-trafficking organizations. Meanwhile, we had like 10 people on our team. Like, we're a tiny little organization who'd been campaigning in 2020 against Pornhub, but that was the perception. And I have seen them aggressively pushing back against age verification, partly, I believe, and this kind of leads into the what's happening next with the Supreme Court side of things. But what we saw in Louisiana, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Pornhub reported an 80% decline in the first 3 months of users. And so it implies that even though their privacy is intact, even though it's, there is no safety concerns or privacy concerns, some adults don't want to put their government ID in because it just feels they're too nervous about that. And my thought is that the porn industry saw the writing was on the wall. Oh, if every state that introduces age verification, we see an 80% decline, we're out of business. We need to change strategy and we need to push back. So they began blocking themselves in other states in protest and trying to stir up this rhetoric of contact your legislators. But I just wondered, from your perception, seeing the kind of the porn industry push back or battle in this way and leading to the Supreme Court where they're suing Texas, declaring this to be unconstitutional. How would you respond to that claim?
Yeah, so that's interesting because, they're suing Texas, they're suing all of us. And so I find their strategy interesting because I also feel like it proves, so in Texas, in Louisiana, they're complying. In other states who don't have this, they're obviously full in business. And then for some, they're blocking, which goes to show you the kind of technology that's out there to sort of do business, to where you're sort of modifying what you can. And so bringing back to your point about the technology that's available now,
Yeah.
I always say the technology got us into this problem, and technology is going to find the solution to get us out, because I do think now we have the capability of multi ways of being able to age verify. You obviously see Meta, where they're doing teen accounts and figuring out ways to, obviously they could easily tell if an account is a teen or not. And so I definitely feel like the technology is there to be able to protect privacy and to do all the things I think that for a user would be important. Now, look, I can't protect you from every bad actor out there. Whatever website you're going to, I don't think these are really good actors. And like you said, if you go to where we're talking about protecting kids and they're fighting against it, although they give lip service that they want to protect kids, I see in articles they say these things, but yet they've been wholly irresponsible. They don't care if a minor, a 10-year-old is on there looking at gang rape porn. They just don't care. They care about profit. That's why, in terms of the path of civilly suing them, has actually been impactful, because they care about their bottom line. And I understand they're a company, but we also expect every industry that deals with adult restricted behavior, like the alcohol industry, the gaming industry, the tobacco industry, there are certain regulations that you have to follow that protect children, because that's our compelling interest as a government, to be able to protect children. We've just sort of given a free pass to this thing that has now really become the public square. The internet is now like the new TV. Mm-hmm. And I think it was in one of the Supreme Court cases, they were saying how TV is obviously pervasive and invasive. You turn it on, and there's obviously very much regulations around that. You can't be showing pornography at 12 o'clock on ABC, but yet we've sort of given a pass to the internet. And so it'll be interesting to see how it all sort of unfolds. I was hoping that also, just like Meta, they're trying to be self-regulate before it comes into place. I mean, obviously the federal government's looking at COSA and whatnot. And that's all I'm asking. I'm all just asking that you just follow like every other industry that has to also protect children. There's obviously the responsibility of a parent. We teach our children, obviously this is not healthy or good. Don't underage drink, but then we also ask the bars to make sure you're carding at the door and you're not serving the minor at the bar.
Right, exactly. I feel like all of these comparisons are so helpful to frame it in people's minds of how absolutely rational it is. And age verification, if it exists in the real world, it absolutely needs to exist online, even more so online, because the content that are in videos on porn sites are much more extreme than any magazine on any shelf. Like that is an era in history long gone. And I'll always remember this 15-year-old boy who came up to me after I gave a talk somewhere, and he said, I just feel like my drug is in my pocket. And every single class, every hour throughout the day, I have to go to the bathroom and masturbate to porn. Like that is the level of my addiction. It's ruined my life. It's taken over my life. He's like, but I don't know how to get free because it's in my phone. Like I can't get free of this. And he was crying and just asking me like, do you know how do people get free from this kind of addiction? And I felt so sad at this. Like it was like a 15-year-old trying to get free from alcohol addiction while carrying a bottle of whiskey in his pocket at all times. And that kind of expectation and pressure that we're expecting. And the laws are protecting children, or are needing to protect children. And this is something that every parent should care about. Or even if you're not a parent, I'm not a parent, but I found my inner mama bear with this. Like it feels like, and just you and I, and then Senator Curdy from Montana, who's a Democrat who introduced age verification there. We got on a call with some representatives in California, and age verification did get introduced there. It sadly hasn't passed through. So several states that introduced it didn't fully pass it, but we just know that the work is still continuing, and a lot hinges on this Supreme Court case. The Free Speech Coalition have submitted a lot of their amicus briefs, and I know a lot of people are analyzing their arguments, but really, their position is device-based apps is the way forward, and that they're rejecting any kind of regulation on the websites themselves and saying it should just be the phones, the computers, all the filters and protections on the devices. And so, of course, I know why they're saying that, because they don't want adults to be nervous and freaked out about putting their ID in. And it's, in my perception, it's a completely monetary priority for, like, they're only seeing it through terms of money and how they can retain most of their users. But I just wondered from your perspective, what you'd say to someone who'd suggest device-based apps as the better solution than age verification.
Well, I always like to look at what our current laws or how we expect other industries to do. And so when you look at online pornography, and I always say in terms of the educating people, maybe who don't look at pornography, it's like, this is not your daddy's Playboy. But yet we require of a Playboy that you actually have to show ID at the store, at the adult store, or if you go to a strip club on Bourbon Street, you have to show ID. This is a standard that we have set up to protect children. And yet that doesn't translate to now what is considered, like hardcore porn, and even worse than what the regular Playboy actually would show, but yet we protect children. And then so in the physical world, this is a standard. And even with other industries, so like, let's say alcohol or gaming. So in the physical world, you go into a casino, you have to show ID. And now we have online gaming. And yet you still have to show electronic ID to show that you are an adult to be able to do sports betting. Same with alcohol delivery in our state. We do love our vices in Louisiana, and all of these regulations are the same when it comes to alcohol delivery and online gaming, and pornography in the physical world, but yet we are saying no for this. And I don't think it's very consistent. And so I think, again, it's because they've been given a pass for so long. It's just that's what's now sort of expected, but yet it's not very consistent with our laws or how we protect children. And so I would say I feel like the people who actually provide the content that's material harmful to minors has the responsibility of making sure a minor is not entering into the door.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say to those who are pushing device. Obviously, all the guardrails, the better, I'm sure.
Right. We say both and.
Both. Let's do it. But my philosophy is the people that are actually providing the material harmful to minors, it's their responsibility first.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really compelling point. Another point that we've had people ask us about is VPNs, and won't so many teenagers just bypass all age verification through the use of a VPN? And I just wondered what you'd say to. Have you had anyone bring that point up?
For sure. So look, any kind of crafty, smart teenager, if they want to go and get alcohol, right, they're going to get the fake ID. They're going to find someone to buy it for them. I'm not going to prevent the person who's determined to go and look at it and to figure out a VPN. But what I am going to prevent, and so if you look at the data, and if you're 10 to 12 years old is the first exposure to online pornography. And I think Common Sense Media put out a report where a majority of kids see pornography for the first time accidentally. I'm going to certainly prevent those kids, right? So they're not going to, if we have age verification, those kids are not going to be exposed. And so just like the person who's going to figure out a way to get the pack of cigarettes or get a way to underage drink, that doesn't mean just because those kids found a way that we say, oh, what? Throw out all the laws. Tell the bars they should just let minors in and we could just serve whoever comes to the bar. No, we know that our laws are good and they're protective and they're going to protect the majority of children. But I'm not going to obviously protect everyone who's determined to do a behavior. And so that's what I would say to the VPN argument.
It's funny, like all the talks around the First Amendment and the Constitution. I'm not an American, so I had to even read up on what some of the laws are, but I'm pretty sure that the American founding fathers were not having in mind hardcore violent pornography when they even envisioned free speech laws. And so the fact that even some of this content that is by any standards beyond obscene, and we have a lot more data now showing the harms and addiction that it causes to children, it grieves me that these laws are being used to protect an industry from the regulation that they really need. And so I think that, I don't know. Do you have any, what are your hopes for the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, of course, I hope that they uphold age verification as constitutional. I do think everything has changed since the late 90s and early 2000s from when those original court precedents have been set. So I do think there's an argument to be made, obviously, that it's not unduly burdensome. The technology is available, that we can do both. We can let the adults who want to exercise their First Amendment right when it comes to this, and then also protect children at the same time. Yeah. And so I think it's doable. I'm obviously very hopeful. And then I think, again, it's a compelling argument to make that within a year's time, you have 19 states. And again, they weren't all just one party. I mean, it's bipartisan support that I just feel that we have to do something, or we're going to really have a lot of issues when it comes to if 10 and 12-year-olds are growing up with online hardcore pornography and what they're seeing is not healthy sexuality displayed, right? And their brains are just not developed enough to process what they're seeing. Right. And we're starting to see some of the ramifications of all that. And so I'm very hopeful. And no matter, I guess, what the opinion is, hopefully we'll continue to be creative and find a path to protect kids.
Absolutely. Well, we recently did an event at the United Nations on age verification, and then in New Jersey, where they've introduced an age verification bill there. And the folks there just talked about you and said how inspired they'd been by your bill. And I think just the beauty of the domino effect and the inspiration, and all it takes is one courageous person to really break through, and just the impact, not only in the States, but we've been working in Norway and the Netherlands and the UK, who are in various stages. The UK obviously passed the online safety bill that goes into effect soon. And Norway are looking to introduce age verification, and Canada, France, a lot of countries in Europe and around the world have even been inspired by the avalanche of age verification laws sweeping the US. And so I just think my hope is that this will be a new global standard, and in 2 or 3 years' time, we'll see an entire age verification set as the standard. And I always remember as well that meme that Pornhub put out on Twitter a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it, but it was of Baby Yoda, and Baby Yoda had the Pornhub reflection in their eyes, and the tagline was 10 minutes after my parents leave the room. And we really called out Pornhub for posting that, saying, are you endorsing, how old is Baby Yoda? Pretty sure if it's not a baby, it's a young child, and you're mocking or making fun of or joking about knowing that kids are on your platform. It does seem that, there's a real resistance to passing age verification, even though I want to give, hope and give them the benefit of the doubt. From everything I've heard and seen, it seems like maybe there is a knowledge that a lot of kids and teens are their first time subscribers, and they don't want to freak out adults from having to put in any of their data, which even if it's fully encrypted, like we said. But anyway, how does it feel just even knowing that a bill that you introduced and passed, saw through, is having a global impact around the world?
Well, it's super humbling. But a lot of things, because I didn't do it alone, I think it was very much primed for this time. Because like you said, the work that you all were doing to hold Pornhub accountable for some of their misdeeds when it comes to non-consensual videos being uploaded, a few other states. Because I remember when I first talked to Gail Dines, and she's like, Laurie, UK is trying to do this, that you need to get in touch with some of the people in UK. And I started following other countries, and I think France and the president there was sort of passionate about it. So it was sort of I think the prime environment for something like this. And obviously, I guess I had a unique background in terms of, profession-wise doing this. So it led, obviously I had a knowledge base around it. And then I'm very thankful for the Louisiana legislature and our past governor, who all came alongside me and saw the benefit of protecting at least Louisiana's children, and then obviously all the other states who wanted to also protect their children. And so it's definitely been, I think, a concerted effort of many people, which I'm so thankful for. And again, when you look at this issue, and even when you pull this issue, again, bipartisan support, it's pretty, because I think people recognize we have to do something.
Louisiana has a bit of a special place in my heart, partly because of your bill being introduced first there. But the first outreach that I ever did in the sex industry in the US was in New Orleans. It was during the Super Bowl in 2013. I'd been in the States for 2 weeks, moved out to work for exoduscry, and we did street and strip club outreach throughout Bourbon Street and the city during that. It was Mardi Gras and Super Bowl week. Really, really crazy. But I met some incredible anti-trafficking organizations and advocates doing work on the ground there, and started doing outreach ever since. So a lot of my own insight into trafficking has come from working with survivors and victims. But I will never forget hearing that a trafficked survivor that I worked with in Cambodia telling me that she was trafficked in a brothel there from age 11, and Western men from the US and Europe would take pornography on their devices, show her their fantasy with a young Asian teen, and get her to act out what they were seeing. And that was the first time that in a real time I made the connection between pornography and trafficking, and how trafficking doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's due to a demand, and men don't just wake up one day and decide to fly across the world and buy a trafficked child for sex. It's pornography is building a fantasy, and for so many, they were first exposed as a child and are struggling with addiction years later. And so I just even want to connect the work that you're doing with not only protecting children from the psychological harm, but we're going after the root of trafficking with these kind of bills. And from working with survivors and seeing firsthand the trauma of trafficking, it's left a very deep impression on my heart that prevention is of utmost importance, and I don't want to see another hundreds of thousands more children going into trafficking. So how do we stop demand, and what is fueling demand? And if it's childhood exposure to porn fueling demand, then then this is one of, if not the most important way to address it. So I'm just so honored and want to say thank you for your courage to go after something that you have so much conviction about. I really believe it's going to change the world, and I'm very hopeful about the Supreme Court decision. We're going to file a brief. We're going to be there in DC. Just wanted to kind of give you a final question and open for any final comments. But for any other states that haven't yet introduced any form of age verification, or any countries that haven't, what would be your encouragement to them of the urgency and importance of introducing age verification?
I'd first say, if you're interested in doing it, call me up. I can give you as much tips as I can. I do believe now is sort of the time to sort of, begin these processes. Again, like you said, there's so many other states that have sort of have started the ball rolling, but not quite gotten it over to the finish line. And so join the other 19 states who are trying to protect their children. And I'll do anything to help as well. I mean, your story is so touching. And so thank you for sharing that, especially the New Orleans connection. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a real issue. And again, it has so many, and I know the porn industry likes to deny all the other societal ills that come with it. But there are. And I think especially when it's tied to early exposure. So.
Well, Representative Schlegel, so happy to have you on our podcast. Thank you for being here, and hope we can continue linking arms in this work in future. So thanks again.
I'll see you at the Supreme Court. I'll be there too.
All right. See you at the Supreme Court. Never thought I'd say that.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You can check out all our podcast episodes, articles, and films at exoduscry.com, and join the daily conversation by following Exodus Cry on all major social platforms.